Okay, welcome everyone. Before we formally start our webinar today, I would like to go through some house rules. During this session, your microphone will be muted until you are invited to speak. And also, please be reminded that to use the Q&A function in the room if you would like to ask a question during the presentation. We will pick your question. Actually, we'll try to cover as much as possible and direct the question to the speakers during the Q&A section following the presentation made by the speaker. So a warm welcome to all the audience to join us today for this episode of the Green Roads webinar series. My name is Idano. I'm a transport specialist from ADB. A gentle reminder that all the previous webinars are available online, and this current episode we are doing today will also be uploaded to the website in a few days. And also another reminder, the next session will be on October 24th. And the topic of the next one will be screening a criteria for policymakers and lending institutions to deliver Paris-aligned roads. Okay, today's section, we will look at the important trade-off between using road transport and economic and social benefits versus the environmental impacts that road transport often come with, particularly in terms of vehicle emissions. Now, with Asian Pacific region projected to be some of the most highly impacted nations from climate change, and also with a significant lack of transport infrastructure. Mr. Studia will cover some of the core issues facing the region and how policymakers are dealing with this issue. Just a short bio of our speaker Studia today. He is the co-team leader for Asian Transport Outlook. The Asian Transport Outlook is a joint initiative of the Asian Development Bank and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Mr. Sudia, he contributes to shaping the transport policies and investments across Asia with over 2 decades of global experience. Now, if we can go back to the topic today, navigating change, the evolving landscape of road sector in Asia. Asian road transport sector faces critical challenges in decarbonization. Despite its massive population and economic activities, Asia's road network is still under development. Furthermore, the region's development needs also emphasize the needs for transport growth, creating a tension between the decarbonization and the need for road infrastructure. The presentation today will examine the double-edged sword of Asia's road infrastructure, acknowledging its role in fostering access and economic growth while recognizing its negative impact. This investigates how Asian countries are developing their road policies in response to global climate change. The research analyzed over 500 policy documents from 30 Asian countries, exploring key trends in how low-income and middle-income countries can balancing the access expansion, infrastructure development, and innovative economic tool with effort to reduce negative impacts of the road transport. Now, please, I will hand over the floor to our speaker, Mr. Sudhir. Hi, Sudhir.
Yeah, thank you, Ida. I'll just share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my screen now. Uh, Good afternoon. Yeah, so I'm really excited about this particular presentation, the evolving landscape of the road transport sector in terms of the policies. The reason being, 22 years back, I started my career designing roads. So I was doing the geometric design of roads, road construction, and from that particular stage, in 2008, there was a pivotal point in my career where I transitioned to working on the environment and the climate change side. Now, over the past 5 years, I'm doing what is called as my dream job. So my job is in the Asian Transport Outlook with the team of my colleagues. We look at transport policies, we look at transport data, and we look at a scale, at a magnitude which has never been done before. And what we do is we try to identify patterns and try to find out what stories is happening in the transport sector, and we use different kind of lenses in doing that. So Asian Transport Outlook is an initiative which was started by Asian Development Bank and now which is being supported by co-supported by the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. We look at to translate transport data into policies, insights and investments. We basically collect data from about 51 economies, 460 cities, and we try to track what is happening with SDGs, what is happening with Paris Agreement at a country level. We track performance across 460 cities and try to understand what kind of policies can be made better, how the policies can be made better, and how can the investments be made better. So we are currently in phase 3 with phase 3.5 starting in November this year. So what do we do? We basically collect and analyze, and we do it like an help desk. So we look at, for example, we look at around 536 indicators across 51 economies, 180 urban indicators, and 550 policy documents which we have analyzed. In our repository, you can find more than 1,200 policy documents. When you start looking at this, you look at so many different stories. And what if you go to the Asian Transport Outlook website, you will see a lot of these stories there. For the road sector, I believe that the choice what I had in 2007, 2008, the shift, what I saw in my career, I am seeing the same shift in the road industry now. The road sector has crossed what we call as the business as usual. Now we are reached a tipping point. I believe that we have crossed tipping point for most of the countries in Asia. So in my presentation, what I will do is I have like 35 minutes. I will try to go through some of the stories what we see in road sector. So the some of the key phrases during my presentation would be the push and pull, less is more, the road ahead is charged, and from choice to necessity. So if you want to remember this particular presentation, think of these four phrases, and you can probably understand what the storyline which I'm going to say. So let me start with push and pull. So we know that there is a great infrastructure gap in Asia, but in terms of the numbers, if you start looking at the numbers, on per capita basis, we have about 10 kilometers per thousand population. This is a simple average. If you do a weighted average, this is about 4.6 kilometers per thousand population. Compared to European countries, compared to Western American, the OECD countries, you will see that it is significantly low, about 18 kilometers per thousand population. So there is a very significant infrastructure gap. If you do it per capita, if you do it per kilometer square, you will see that there is a great push for the transport sector, for the road transport sector to build more infrastructure. This is there. If on the right hand side, you will see a figure where we compare the road kilometers by capita with the motorization rate, how fast the vehicles are growing. To understand this particular figure, you need, let me tell you the numbers behind it. Over the last 20 years, we added about 10 million kilometers of road in Asia. And in that time, 1 billion vehicles were added onto the streets. 1 billion vehicles, 10 million kilometers of road. The in most of the countries, in the low and middle income countries, we see that vehicles are growing at twice or thrice the pace of the way than the road construction rates what we see. So vehicles are growing very, very fast compared to the road. There is a great infrastructure gap, and I think most of the countries will try to bridge some of those gap, not necessarily reach the levels of what we see from the OECD side, but we will see that particular push coming because of the need for the infrastructure. Asia has about 60% of global population. In terms of the infrastructure, we have only about 38% of the global infrastructure. The pull comes from the access and connectivity side of it. Now, 60% of people without access to transport, as per the SDG definition, lives in Asia. On the left-hand side, you can see that Asia, the rural access and the urban access, as per the SDG definitions, whatever the definitions SDG recommends, we use it, and then we try to compare continents. The majority of the people without access live in Asia, and this is something which we will not be able to bridge over the next few years. So definitely there is a need for infrastructure, a need for better infrastructure for people to connect the rural population and the urban population with public transit and with the roads. 400 million population at this point of time do not have access to rural roads in Asia. And the numbers would vary significantly among the countries in terms of the share, but this is a big challenge. Why? On the right hand side, you will see how does our sector compare with the other sectors. Now, if you look at the SDG database and try to look at other sectors, how other sectors are doing, and try to use a magnifying lens and try to understand what is happening in the transport sector, you will realize that the other sectors have actually performed well over the last decade or so. So in terms of access, transport access is 1.8 billion people without access. But if you look at access to electricity, access to clean cooking, this is about 1.2 billion people. So we have actually more number of people not connected to the transport compared to electricity or clean cooking. And those numbers have actually radically changed on those two sectors. But our performance has been very poor. So there is a great push and there is a great pull. Now, over the next 30 years, from 2020 to 2050, we will add about 500 million population in Asia. If you look at some of the best models in the world, what they say is that the vehicle population will increase by about 700 million to about 1.5 billion vehicles. Take an average about 1 billion vehicle. Now, over the last 2 decades, we saw that vehicle population increased by 1 billion. We added 10 million kilometers of road. So over the next 30 years, how many kilometers of road we will add? But what we are seeing now is a very different trajectory here. The argument is that Asia has started building roads at a slower rate. Between 2000 to 2010, we added roads at about an annual rate of 3.5%. Between 3.2%, sorry. Between 2010 to 2020, this 3.2% became 2.5%. 2020 to 2030, this 2.5% will reduce to about 2%, 2.1, depending on how the countries would build the roads. And this trend will continue. So in spite of the great infrastructure gap, the great access and connectivity gap, you will see that the countries would be able to add roads at the lower rate compared to what we have seen in the past. And there are many reasons for this. So I come to my second argument, less is more. The challenge on the transport sector is not only about access and connectivity, but also the externalities, the air pollution, the climate change, the road safety. There are multiple problems which the road sector needs to solve. The good news, let me start with the good news. The good news is that road sector has actually performed very well in reducing air pollution challenge. If you look at the figures here, where we compare PM 2.5 emissions, NOx emissions, SOx emissions, black carbon emissions coming from the road, and we have given the data from 2000 to 2022. And this is one of the best models in the world, where they quantify the bottom up, how much is the air pollution or the emissions coming from the tailpipe. And what you will see is that among all the modes of the transport sector, road sector has actually performed very well. Since 2015, PM 2.5 emissions have reduced by about 2.5% annually. So there is a great performance what we see. So the argument what I'm trying to make here is that we have crossed the tipping point for air pollution challenge. Going forward, even if we add 1 billion vehicles, we will only see that these emissions will only reduce. You see a little bit of stagnation here, but as the Euro 6 kicks in India and China, the bigger countries went for Euro 6 during the COVID period. And as the newer vehicles will come in, you will see that the air pollutants will go down. So since 2015, about 62% of the countries have actually reduced PM emissions, SOx emissions, black carbon emissions. The NOx emissions, I think, will reduce. It is only a matter of time for the transport sector. So the problem that I'm trying to communicate is that transport sector can solve its problem. And you can see here, when I started my career, the biggest challenge for the transport sector was the air pollution. And what we see is that we have managed to find solutions and implement it at a scale. However, this trend is good for Asia. But if you look at some of the individual countries, you will see that we are still stuck at Euro 2 levels. So probably the PM 2.5 emissions, black carbon emissions, SOx emissions will be increasing. While at the regional level, we have crossed the tipping point, but for some countries, it is not yet so. Then comes the road safety challenge. Now we are very close to the tipping point here, but it all depends on what kind of lens we use. If you look at country statistics, we have crossed the tipping point. But if you look at the WHO statistics, we are very close to the tipping point. Now, if the latest status report from World Health Organization, based on their own modeling, they are saying that yeah, 69% of the countries in Asia since 2016 have managed to reduce road crash fatalities. However, the intensity of the reduction is only about 0.6% annually. 0.6%. The good news is this is twice the global rate. So we are improving much higher than what the global performance has been. The bad news is that this rate will not take us to the SDG goals. No way we are going to make the SDG goals. And as the countries will become rich, they will try to meet the road safety challenge and try to save the lives as much as they can. So what we see is that, yes, the intensity, the focus on the road safety will increase as we will fail the SDG target. And the countries will start trying to find answers to this particular challenge. But we are very close to the tipping point. The third is the energy consumption in the transport sector. Now, here again, two more figures. Left-hand side, how the energy consumption varies by different modes. Road sector is a significant contributor. If you on the right-hand side, what kind of fuel do we use? The story here is that we are very close to a tipping point on transport energy consumption on the transition. And currently, the renewable energy has actually doubled the share in the transport sector, but it is still about 3.2% of the total energy consumption in the transport sector. So, yeah, the progress has been extremely slow, but in some of the countries, we are seeing that there is a rapid uptake of electric vehicles, and we see that this transition is going to hold. Now, on the left-hand side, you see the vehicle imports, because this is the most reliable data what we could find. The vehicle registrations, it is very difficult to get at the country level. So what we have is the trade of the vehicles, and this is in economic value. The good news is that between 2017 to 2023, the import of electric vehicles has increased by about 9 times from 3 billion economic value of imports in 2017, we have reached about 27 billion. 27 billion. In the global import, we have a minor share, about 13%. It is just because we import a lot of electric two-wheelers, which have lower economic value compared to the cars. So probably, but in terms of the numbers, this is really a very good number. In terms of export, actually, Asia is trying to become an export for electric vehicles. Currently, our market share is about 34%. One third of the global exports of electric vehicles is by Asia. So there is a good news here on the electric vehicle side. Post-COVID, we see dramatic shift in the policy landscape of the electric vehicles. Initially, the countries were testing the waters. I think countries have now started the stepping inside the water, and we see that there is a dramatic shift coming. If you look at all the global models, more or less everybody is saying that it would be that there will be an exponential increase in electric vehicles on road. And we have reached that particular stage in terms of sales in most of the Southeast Asian countries and some of the South Asian countries. So within few years, you will see rapid uptake of electric vehicles. So previously, I spoke about 700 million vehicles or 1.5 billion vehicles being added on the streets. What I am trying to indicate is that these vehicles may not necessarily be the internal combustion vehicles. These will be probably electric vehicles going forward. So this is something which is a tipping point, which is we are very close to this particular tipping point. Now let me come to the main storyline. Climate change, what is happening? And we are nowhere close to the tipping point. On the left-hand side, you see the figures. What is the latest status of the transport CO2 emissions, the domestic transport? We have removed the international transport. We are looking only at the domestic transport. And what we see that probably for the first time in 2023, we emitted as much as Europe and North America combined. So we have reached about 2.8 gigaton, which is very close to what Europe and North America emits. The amount of intensity of increase in 2023 was is you cannot really compare it. We increased the emissions by about 6.6%, which is much higher than any other sector in Asia, across any other region in the world in terms of the transport sector. So transport sector grew fastest in Asia compared to any other regions within the transport across any other sector in Asia. So we have actually increased emissions at a very significant rate. However, the good news here is that we are still growing over a period of time. If you look at this, actually, in many countries, the growth of CO2 emissions is significantly lower than the GDP. So we are going towards what we call as absolute decoupling and relative decoupling. The story which you need to understand is, will we peak before 2030? And if you look at some of the most recent projections which have come, yesterday there was the energy transition outlook by DNV was released. If you open that particular outlook and if you look at the numbers, you will see that transport CO2 emissions in Asia would peak before 2030. So most of the people are now getting confident that they will do. But if you look at all the historical trend lines, we don't think that it is going to happen. So we are near to the tipping point. We are not yet there. Probably before 2030, we will reach that particular tipping point on climate change. But this is a very, very critical for us. And when we think of the decarbonization of the transport sector, we need to look at the road sector very closely because 89% of the CO2 emissions coming from transport is coming from road sector. So road sector is the most critical sector when we talk about decarbonization. Within the road sector, different modes have different emission intensities based on their efficiencies. These comparisons are available based on bottom-up calculation by different models. So the argument what I want to use here is that decarbonizing solutions for the road sector would be different for different countries. There is no single silver bullet solution which countries would implement. So I come back to the original argument. Are we on the business as usual side? We are not on the business as usual side. If we were on the business as usual side, by 2023, we would have emitted more than 3.1 gigatons. We are still at about 2.8 gigatons. So we have deviated significantly from the historical baselines, the red line. If you look at the red line, this is the line which was based on all the global models you can find before 2015 for Asia, before 2015. After 2015, we see the orange line. But as I said, here also we don't see a peak. But if you look at only the models which have come post-COVID, you will see that they say that by 2030, we can actually peak the transport CO2 emissions in Asia, which means that road sector has actually started making some radical change. But we are nowhere close to where we should be by 2050, even with the path what we have taken. We need to be about 300 million tons by 2050. If you look at IPCC, the sixth assessment report, based on an average scenarios, various scenarios. So I believe that we have the choice what I made in 2007, 2008, when I started working, shifted from that particular to working on the climate change. That kind of radical shift has come to the road industry. Why? Now, 93% of the population in Asia, on the right-hand side, you will see that are living in countries which have either established a net zero target or in the advanced process of preparing a net zero target. The net zero target could be for 2050, 2060, or 2070, or it could be a very similar target of not necessarily net zero, it could be carbon neutral or something very similar target. The point here is that 10 years back, none of the countries had a net zero target in Asia. Now we have 93% of population living in countries having net zero target. What it means is that going ahead, it will not be business as usual because as the countries will establish net zero target, all the sectors would need to contribute. Road sector is predominantly a sector where the demand will increase. Within the transport industry, Asia is where the predominant increase in transport demand is. The best global model, ITF Outlook, if you look at it, they will say that over the next 30 years, 50% of the global demand will originate in Asia. So this is where the solutions need to come. And this is why we are no more in the business as usual. We see a policy landscape shifting. And this shift is happening fast. And coming to the last point, what I was making, the road, I have made that point Push and pull, less is more, road ahead is charged. Now I am going to make an argument from choice to necessity. 10 years back, climate adaptation, resilience was a choice for the countries. Now it is no more a choice. Why? The amount of damages what people have now coming up is significantly high. The first estimate I remember, the first estimate when I saw about how much is the annual estimated damage for the road sector in Asia, it put around 8 billion tons, 8 billion dollars, 8 billion annual damage cost they put. But recently, we have started looking at costs which are about $46 billion. So, what the new tools, the new rapid advancements, what we are seeing is that it is becoming a central part of all the transition which are going to take place. Currently, countries have built significant amount of infrastructure which is not yet climate proof. So countries will try to find gaps and try to close those gaps going forward. Recent COP meeting, you saw that there was a lot of discussion. The previous one, you had a lot of discussions on climate resilience and adaptation, and I think there is a big storm coming on this particular side where the countries will need to do that. So this will cause a lot of disruption in the transport sector. So coming to the policies now, we have looked at all the trends. Coming to the policies, we see a radical shift in the policies post 2010. We see radical choice of policies. The table, what you see here is that as countries are going towards net zero, they have not yet established direct and indirect targets in the NDCs, but this will come. What I'm trying to indicate with this particular slide is that the change is coming. Currently, you don't see this in the NDCs, but believe me that if you look at the policy documents, you will start seeing that there is a big change which has come. If you look at on the left-hand side, the kind of solutions which are coming, they are very different solutions which has never been done before. So the countries have started waking up. Of course, the progress would be slow. The progress would be something where, based on the appetite the countries have. But often the mistake what I see which is happening is that people look at NDCs and they say that, yeah, the transport sector ambition is very low. The transport sector is not really integrated in the NDCs. The problem here is that NDCs don't necessarily capture the ambition of the transport sector. The number of references, if you look at all transport sector targets, NDCs report only about 25%. Based on our estimate, we looked at more than 500 policy documents, we looked at 25 countries to understand that. What we found was, if you look at NDCs and try to judge the transport sector, you are going to make a big mistake. And this is very, very critical because under the Paris alignment exercise, most of the MDBs are now looking at NDCs very closely. And NDCs is the mechanism where reporting will happen of what kind of mitigation and adaptation measures they are taking. Currently, the NDCs do not do justice to the transport sector or the road sector. Only about 10% of climate mitigation and adaptation measures are sitting inside the NDCs. 90% is sitting outside the room. They are no more, they are not even considered in the NDCs. So it is important that if you want to understand the appetite of the transport sector, you need to look beyond the NDCs, look at the transport policy documents, look at what the road sector policies are, and then when you start looking at it, you will see that we are at the verge of the transition or the transformation. So this is the main slide, which probably tells you the story which I've been telling till now. If I have to summarize the points which I was making, on the left-hand side, you see that initially, when I started my career, predominantly the policies were for road infrastructure, the red line, if you could see that red colors, it was significant on that particular side. But slowly you see that, yes, multimodal policies started growing, aviation policies started growing, the logistics policies started growing, and then you see that cumulatively the policies have started growing. But if you look at the dotted black line, we see that there is a radical shift which has happened in the past decade. The policies on externalities, the documents on externalities are increasing. So you see road safety plan, you see the air quality plan, you see climate change plans, you see that road safety, you see that countries are preparing transport decarbonization plans, transport decarbonization strategies, and you see greater references to transport mitigation and adaptation measures, air pollution, climate change. So what I'm trying to indicate is that the policy narrative is shifting. Yes, access and connectivity will happen, improvement will happen, road infrastructure will increase, but the kind of infrastructure what will increase will be very, very different from what we have seen. Massive urbanization. Now, if the total population of Asia is increasing by 500 million over the next 30 years, 1 billion people will shift from rural to urban, or the rural areas will become urbanized. So the kind of infrastructure which will come will be very different. So on the right hand side, you see the implications. What are the implications? Now, if you do the numbers of how the transport share of the transport infrastructure and maintenance, if you look at the entire transport infrastructure, looking at road and rail, these two inland transport infrastructure, you see that there is a shift which is happening. On the right hand side, you see that there is a shift which is happening in terms of share of infrastructure, in terms of transport sharing. Maybe this is the right figure. You go on the left hand side, you see that the share of road in transport investments, considering the construction and maintenance, was about 65%. This is for the total infrastructure. 23% for heavy rail, 5% for high speed rail, 6% for metro. If you look at 2011 to 2021, we see that has shrinked. The road share has shrinked. And this is the story which we will see. Of course, the total budget might be increasing, but it is just that there is more decarbonization measures. So other modes will become more important for the transport sector. You will try to find different solutions. So what I'm trying to say that this is not business as usual what you are seeing. If you look at the middle figure, the official development assistance by the governments, you will see that there is a radical change in the way they have lended money to the low and middle income countries, from 56% to 43%, from rail increase from 28% to 44%. So there is a radical change in the investment share of different modes, because people have started looking at decarbonization, people have started looking at air pollution, starting at looking at air road safety and trying to find different solutions. So what will happen is that the money for the road transport sector, I think, will shrink to some extent, because people have limited pot of money. You need to find solutions. You have different kind of challenges. We have been underestimating investing on maintenance part. So as the network size will increase, as the climate resilience will become the key buzzword for everything, all the conversations we will have on the roadside, you need to see that we need to start climate proofing the roads. You will see that the construction, the amount of money which will be available for the construction will reduce to some extent, at least in terms of the shares. In terms of the total volume, it might still increase, but it would be, if I have to summarize it, I would say that less is more. We will never reach the stage of European countries. We may not necessarily use it. Now, coming to the main argument, on the right hand side, you will see that the road sector has actually started finding solutions now. So what you see is the greater share of the PPP is coming onto the road sector. So this is based on the analysis of the PPP database, which is developed by the World Bank. So summary: if you look at the policies, as I said, that there is a radical shift in the electric vehicle policies. If you look at the typology of policies, you will see a drastic shift. Now, one of the bottlenecks what we see on the electrification side is the infrastructure, and this is where we see greater focus on the infrastructure also coming in. So the policy typologies are changing. The countries are focusing on the electric vehicles, and you see a lot of solutions being coming on the electric side of it. On the right hand side, you see as the imports are increasing, the policies are also increasing. So we see about 6% as the 6 times increase in the import, 5 times increase in the import. We see that imports have nearly increased by 6 times. The policies have increased by 5 times compared to 2015. So there is a radical shift in the policies. There are greater number of electric vehicles policies coming, and countries will start to implement it. And as they start implementing it, you will start seeing different kind of solutions. So there is another struggle now. One of the points which we often discuss when we talk about the road sector is the transition to electric vehicles and what it would mean for the road budgets, the country, the fuel taxes, what we used to collect and what we used to go into the transport sector. Here, I think the policy makers are waking up. We often think that the policymakers don't know what is happening. It is wrong. If you look at the kind of solutions which is growing, so policymakers have also started realizing that they need to find alternate part of the money to maintain and to construct the road infrastructure, and they are trying to use different economic instruments and try to find different financial instruments and trying to see how they can increase the budget for the road sector. And this is where you see that different kind of solutions the countries have started thinking in terms of economic, in terms of investment. So this is something which the policymakers are well aware. In terms of the implementation, it has been slow, but I think the countries would wake up to this particular challenge. So countries realize that this is a big challenge for them, and they have started looking at solutions. And the solutions might be very different for different countries, depending on their different development stage. So overall, this particular slide tells you how the policy narrative is shifting. On the x-axis, you see the share of measures between 2000 to 2015. If you take all the transport policy documents and try to find the share of the measures, different solutions, what is the share? The x-axis. The y-axis is the share of measures post 2015. So if you look at the dotted line, if the policies are sitting above the dotted line, it means that they have got a priority now compared to the points what you see on the below the dotted line. The interest is growing, but it does not mean that the total number of solutions are reducing. It only means that the policies are increasing faster, so the shares are changing, but in not in absolute number of policy measures. For example, asset management, we see that the interest in management has reduced. Initially, it used to be 2%, about 2.2% before 2000 to 2015. Now, this is about 1.3% of the total measures. What I'm trying to indicate is that the total number of measures might have doubled. But what this particular slide shows is the change in the mindset which is coming in the road sector. You see that electric mobility is the focus on the electric mobility is increasing very, very fast. Now, the total measures post 2015, we see 2.5. Earlier, it was only 1.5. If you look at the EV charging, the ITS, freight and logistics, 1.5%, it was below earlier, less than 1%. So basically, policymakers have started trying to find different solutions and trying to focus on those solutions. Implementation might be lagging, but it is just that the implementation might be lagging, but over a period of time, countries will try to find solutions. So coming to the point, what I was trying to make, that we have crossed a tipping point on the road sector, that the policy shift is happening, and we see that there is a great change which is coming in the sector. Now, the question is, yes, all these arguments are excellent at the regional level. How is the variation at the country level? Now, this is the question which people often ask us, like, what is happening at the country level? Can you tell us? So for that particular reason, what we did was we came up with one particular paper. This paper would be released in this the IRF meeting, the Road Congress, which will happen. And in this paper, what we did was we looked at all the innovative policies which we could find and policy examples which we could find. And you will see that, for example, these 10 solutions we have used as a benchmark to see which countries are proposing these kind of solutions. And you will see that countries have started thinking of the solutions which the experts used to preach. The countries have started integrating in their policy document. For example, adopt a digital strategy for the road, or Dig One policy, or performance-based contracting, or preparing disaster preparedness plan, focus on the knowledge side. Those kind of solutions are increasing, and you can see country examples. Of course, the paper will come only after 2 or 3 weeks, but what is the best resource for you? My argument here is go to the asiantransportoutlook.com, go to the analytical outputs, go and click the Green Roads profile. Now you will see Green Roads profile for more than 20 countries here. This is probably for me the best profile in a way. Why? Because it was not that because we developed it. It is just because the kind of dots we connect. What we do is we collect the data, the drivers, we collect the impact, we collect the drivers, pressure, state, impact, and response, the framework what we use, and we try to understand what is happening in that particular country and what kind of policies. The last two figures, you will see the detailed policy recommendations at the country level. If the country would have set a target for road sector, you can find it here. So please go to this particular website. This is a crown jewel of the ATO. You go to this, try to find out what kind of policies the countries are doing. And sometimes I think Most of us, when we started doing it, we were amazed with the policy references. Of course, the elephant in the room is whether they are implemented or they are just policy recommendations. Difficult to judge. But I think that over a period of time, the sector, as you would see from the road air pollution side, we make a slow progress, but we find solutions. Yes, it takes time, but if we can innovate, if we can go faster, I think there is nothing like that. So this is where I will try to close my particular presentation. I think I'm on time. Uh, if you have any questions, I had only 35 minutes. You can just shoot an email to us. We can have bilateral chats, and we can go for. If you have any questions, we will happy to answer. Thank you from my side.
Thank you so much, Sudhir, for the insights to the road sector decarbonization. While we do see a few hands raised in the back, but may I just invite the audience, if you have question, could you please uh send them through the Q&A box, which is at the bottom, on a bit on the right hand side, Q&A box, and we will read your question from there. Um, so I will start with a few questions to let Sudhir gives us more to share more of his views. Um, First question, I will note that you have shown us the pathway, and with all these policies and the data analysis, how confident do you feel that the world will meet its global targets around GHG and the global warming? Can you share with us more of your views on it?
Uh, yeah, thank you. Ethan. It is very difficult question to answer. Like 8 years a non-advocacy thing. So if you ask me personally, what I see, when I started my career, we were going at a 6-degree trajectory. Now we are very close to 3-degree trajectory in the transport sector. I'm talking about transport in terms of the change what we see. So I go back to this particular slide. It tells you where we are and where we are going. 1 minute. Yeah, this one. If you look at this, when I started my career, probably we were on the red line. Now we are no more on the red line. We are going towards the orange line. And I believe that we are no more on the orange line. We are going below that particular thing. So if you look at the NDCs, the economy-wide target, I think we will meet. At least from the transport sector, we will provide fair contribution. I am very aware of the kind of change, the solutions which will come, because I think it is possible. But the question here is, can we go to 500 million tons by 2050? At this point of time, it is radically a different target. It is, even if we raise our appetite, it looks very difficult. But I have to go back 20 years. I thought that we will never be on the orange line. If I was in the orange line, I would have been very, very happy. So change can come, and change can come very, very fast. We don't know that. But yes, at this point of time, it looks very difficult that we will meet the IPCC goals, at least from the transport sector, to decarbonize faster. Then the other sectors, transport sector is considered to be difficult by many experts, many policymakers. But I believe that if you look at the transition, if you look at air pollution, if you look at the source apportionment studies, transport is not the biggest polluter, not among top three, not among top four for many of the cities. So solutions will come. Solutions, it is only a matter of time. It is about how best we will try to find those solutions and implement it. The countries are aware of it, and countries are trying to find solutions. So that is the good news. But when we look at the policies, we also realize that there are many countries which are very, very ambitious. The statements, what we see, the targets, they will not necessarily be able to meet. So you have to look at country by country and try to see what is happening. I believe that Personally, I believe that we will peak transport CO2 emissions by 2030 globally. Within Asia, probably there is a good chance that we might do that. It is 6 more years, probably 6 years, 6 more years down the line. If we have a conversation, we will see that we would have peaked transport CO2 emissions, but yeah, 6 years. But definitely we will peak. We will not peak within the next 10 years. That is for sure. I can bet my money
Okay,
on that.
that's it. Thank you, Sudhir, for the insights. We got a few questions in the Q&A box. Thank you, Jonathan. I think this is someone from the Philippines. he actually raised a number of questions. Firstly, what are the potential applications of the Green Road Toolkits and assessment tool that in the Philippines infrastructure project, particularly in enhancing climate resilience and the sustainable mobility for rural and urban areas?
Uh, this I may not be the right person to answer this because this
Uh,
is yeah.
yeah, I think uh we have Rebecca online, but I'm not sure if she's in a position to answer this. Otherwise, let's um move to some of his other questions. Uh, in what ways can the implementation of green roads in the Philippines support inclusive growth and equitable development, particularly in disaster-prone regions and underserved communities?
Yeah, very difficult for me to answer this. But what I
Yeah,
see, let me give you an answer of what I see. Basically, I'm sitting in a panel where we are thinking about climate resilient supply chains, and we are trying to see what is happening. This is a global panel, and we are trying to see what kind of changes are we seeing in terms of supply chains and how countries and companies can think of the supply chains. So, what you see, what the transformation over the last 10 years is because of the technologies which have come in. Now you can use the GIS maps. You can go to the, if you go to one particular GRI, there is a toolkit which is there online. If you go there, if you go to the Philippines there, you can actually identify based on the current climate projections, based on the different pathways which has been established, you can see the damage on the different road networks, different links, and you can identify which are the most critical links for you, and the policymakers can reorient their policy recommendations and try to see that how best they can address that gaps, the weakest spots in their network, and try to improve it. So what I'm trying to indicate is that that kind of technologies have come in and they are freely available for policymakers, for the experts to use. You can play with the data, you can play with the scenarios, and try to see how best you can leverage the use of the tools and the technologies to find right solutions for you. So that benefit has come to the policymakers. 10 years back, it was very difficult. Now you can see, you just have to go online, find different solutions for it. So I believe that in terms of the change, this is the change what we see.
yeah, okay. I think another related question would be, well, maybe that's for Surya to answer in the best place. Um, Another one is in what way can the implementation of green roads in the Philippines support inclusive growth? Oh, sorry. Uh, sorry, I might missed one. Um, yeah, sorry. That's the question would be how can green roads development contribute to addressing water management and the biodiversity conservation challenges specifically to Philippines, such as flood mitigation and the protection of critical habitats. I think my colleague Rebecca has actually provided some feedback that in ADB we do have a green roads toolkits, and in the earlier webinar in April, integrated water and land management into road developments for enhanced resilience, which would I think already covered this concerned question. And typically, dig ones, green natural based solution is that kind of those typical solutions that to this question, but more details will be available in the earlier session, earlier webinar of the green road series. Okay, so I still see a few hands raised in the audience. If it's possible, if I may invite Alvin to unmute yourself and raise the question. Or my colleague Mark, can you unmute Elvin to speak? Okay, seems some technical issues there. I don't see the. Anyway, feel free to put your question in the Q&A box so that we can address them accordingly. And maybe another question, which is related to the road sector decarbonization, but more of a broader topic. Many of the ADB countries are not only facing the challenge of the traffic growth, GHG emission, but they might be also relying on the export of oil or fossil-based fuel to generate income, not just for their roads, but also for their social services, other infrastructure. Are there any good examples of country looking not just transition away from petrol vehicles, but also to transition their economics away from being relying on the fossil fuel sales?
Yeah, we see actually several examples for this. See, the biggest change what we see post COVID is that historically the if you look at the internal combustion engine, only few countries used to manufacture. Now what we are seeing is with the electric vehicle now, many countries are aspiring to become the hub of the electric vehicle manufacturing, or at least the assembly of it. So you see that the countries have grown the appetite. This particular slide will show exactly what I'm trying to indicate. If you look at EV manufacturing, for example, here, which is very close, earlier, you see that earlier this was about 0.3%, now it is about 0.6%. So the interest in EV manufacturing has increased. And this is where as I said, that import is 16%, export is one third, which is 34%. That the countries are actually trying to move away from this and trying to build new supply chains. Countries are trying to look at different other solutions. The change is coming. The countries know that yes, they have been importing or they have been exporting oil, but the change is coming, and countries have started preparing for that particular change in terms of economic, in terms of the transport sector. So we see that yes, but it will be the change will happen only a matter of it will be happening over a period of time. It will not be abrupt. So today is all IC vehicles, tomorrow it is all electric. No, it will take at least 2 decades for those vehicles to go out and the new vehicles to come in. So the change will come slowly, but you see that there is a lot of interest. There is a lot of interest, and we are actually started looking at some of the employment side of it, trying to see whether we can get some estimates on those kind of things to understand what kind of change are we seeing. But definitely the change is coming based on this particular figure. Yeah, and countries, you
Yeah.
should go to the Green Roads Toolkit, the Green Roads profile, not the toolkit. Go to the Green Roads profile and you will see which countries are looking at EV manufacturing, what kind of subsidies they are giving, and you will realize that most of the countries are trying to do that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. A follow-up question regarding this. We do see some like positive sign from these figures from data. But in your policy research, do you have any analysis on, for example, what is the current bottleneck and what is the barriers and how should we take action, for example, to as an enabler to create an enabling environment for such a transition? Is any uh, data or analysis
Yeah,
tell us some background of this?
okay, I have a very good take on this. Like if you look at the biggest challenge what we are very poorly integrated in the nationally determined contributions, because the NDCs, people have started using NDCs lens whether we like it or not, and they are looking at the transport sector using that lens. And we are very poorly represented inside the nationally determined contributions. So this is probably is the biggest barrier for us, that we have to ensure that the policy documents get feeded inside the NDCs, and transport sector takes that particular ownership to ensure that they are able to commit and they are able to implement. Now, if you look at the climate finance, let me pull some numbers for you. If you look at I have spoken about the ODA, how the ODA shifted. If you look at all the multilateral climate finance which has come in since 2009 onwards, if you look at the transport sector got only about 7% of the total finance which came in. So transport sector has done very poor in terms of attracting climate finance. In transport sector, low and middle income countries attracted the low income countries attracted 1% of the total climate finance which came in. So the low income countries will find it much more difficult to access this kind of finance, because the NDCs don't really talk about the solutions. People look at the NDCs and they say that, okay, there is nothing happening in the sector, why should we finance it? And this is one of the biggest challenges what we see. Transport is a growing sector. Transport is a sector which is growing, but it is very poorly represented in the reporting for the climate change. And this has to change. If this has to change, automatically things will change. I'll give you a very good example on the resilience side of it. Now, if you look at all the policies, you see a big gap on the resilience and the climate adaptation. Now, if you look at all the solutions, 25 countries, more than 550 policy documents, and if you try to combine them, you see that 90% of the solutions are mitigation oriented. Only 10% of the solutions are adaptation oriented. You know that the damage is very high. 90% in terms of that billions, it is about 10 to 50 billion of annual damage. What you will see in terms of share in total transport budget, it would be very high. But in terms of the policies, it is very low. So there is a bottleneck. That policies, for example, on climate resilience, we don't see that. The policies, the freight and logistics is something very interesting. 60% of the total emissions in the transport sector comes in the freight side. But in terms of the policies, they are very few. So these are the kind of gaps what we see. And it has an impact on the investments also. Like if you look at the last year climate finance in the transport sector in Asia, less than 1%, 0.13%, I think, came to the climate explicitly on resilience and adaptation. 0.13 of the total transport climate finance last year in Asia went for climate resilience and adaptation. So you can imagine the kind of challenges what we have, because we don't have the policies, there are no investments. We don't have the policies because the data is not coming in that particular manner. The messages are not going in. So these are the kind of challenges you will see. Not all is perfect, and there will be a lot of radical pulls and pressures on the transport sector. So this is very critical. We need to ensure that we are adequately represented in the NDCs, because MDBs have started looking at NDCs very closely. And that opportunity lies now, because we are coming up with the next generation of NDCs. Starting this COP, we will see that countries are coming up with better NDCs. So for that particular reason, we have started releasing the NDC profiles. Till now, today we have released about 5 countries. In the ATO website, if you go, you will find that we have about 8 countries NDC profiles. Each country, we have written a text about 30 to 40 pages, trying to identify those gaps, trying to identify where we see the inconsistency between the NDCs and the transport policy documents. And this is available at the country level. And you can find these documents in the ATO website. You just have to go and look at the transport climate profiles, look at the NDCs one. We have released it 5 countries today morning. So you will see more countries being released over the next few weeks till COP. And we are going to come up with a knowledge product with other partners, with ADB, AIIB, and FCDO on this particular side, on what are the various gaps what we see and what the country should be doing about it.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for the detailed uh, discussion particularly regarding the policy level, regarding the gaps and the challenges that we are facing currently. I think we are almost on time. I had a very good presentation followed by some discussion, some particular question. Just want to say great thank you to all the audience that for joining us today. I understand some of the audience may have like the question not only to this particular session at this episode, but also on other aspects of the green roads. Please feel free to visit our website, and also please feel free to reach out to ADB team, to the Green Road team, to the Transport Outlook, Asian Transport Outlook team for any questions. We're looking forward to having you in the future episodes of Green Roads. And great thanks to Mr. Sudhir Gota for giving us the great presentation today. Um, so I would like to conclude the webinar today. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you.